It's the start of it. Ask me anything. Ask Macca. If you are tuning in, then please let me know where you are in the world, what we're hopefully going to talk about over the next however long. Said last week, it could be 5 minutes, it could be 2 minutes, it could be 30 minutes, and it's just to see what kind of subjects and topics and questions we get coming in, and see what you might want to talk about. So hopefully, if you're interested in anything to do with football, anything to do with psychology, personal development, performance, mindset, all of those different aspects, then please let me know and we can have a little question and answer session and see where we go with that. So this is definitely the start of how we do this. I'm going to want to do this going live over the next number of weeks. Just again, I said this last week whenever I did my first one, just because I got a lot of messages of people saying, we see the stuff you're doing on social media, and we keep seeing that you're, going and speaking to organizations or whatever you happen to be doing, whatever work you're doing for the companies you work for, but don't really see a lot of you online. It's more of the kind of the work side and the business side. And so I think it's worth just putting out there that I am, I got quite a few different things going on in my life. So more than happy to discuss the football side, or whether it's to do with how I get into the psychology element and mental performance, because that again is something that I've really, really enjoyed over my life, something that's been really, really beneficial in terms of being able to improve as a person, improve as a player. Definitely when I was playing for Tottenham Hotspur or Norwich City, or had a short period at Burnley, as well as Luton Town, and of course for Northern Ireland when I was playing internationally. So when I finally ended up as a second spell at Norwich City, I really, by that stage, I was 32, and I just thought that this is the one area of my life in terms of that psychology, that mental performance, that I just really, really enjoyed. So I thought whenever I decided to stop playing, it was something that I wanted to get into on a permanent basis, and started working in this field of personal development. And that is pretty much exploded, really, because whenever I decided to do this, it was from a position of no one from my background. I'm going to say my background, I'm just changing my phone here for Instagram. For my background of football, there was no one else that I'd come across that had gone down the route that I've gone down, which is becoming a keynote speaker and performance psychologist. Because at the time I was looking at people like Chris Akabusi, who had been an Olympian and coming from that background of athletics into keynote speaking, or someone like a Will Carling, or different people like who were had sporting backgrounds similar to me, but were much more high profile, but also just from very different sports in terms of rugby is so different, even in terms of traditionally the classes that people would come from. Football was very much a working class sport, which is my background, but then to have a attempt to try and get into the keynote speaking side, competing with the likes of a Chris Akabusi or a Will Carling, and that obviously rugby or athletics generally is much more middle class and probably better educated than the people coming out of football. So it was a big step for me to try and compete with and go down the route of going into corporates, going into businesses, and speaking to them about their performance. And that's something that, since I started down this route, has been really, really fascinating to me, because when you start talking about what creates performance, I'm just going to put this out on Twitter now, it is such a big question to ask. And so whenever you have that opportunity to try and understand it, then you delve into an area which is just so multifaceted, multi-layered. There's so many different elements to performance. And interesting to me, I came across an area or a model that actually I saw from the English FA. So when I was doing my coaching badges, I on a slightly different topic, I did my coaching badges with Dwight York. So any Man United fans or Aston Villa fans might know Dwight York. And I remember doing my coaching badges with Yorkie and him turning up in his Lamborghini every day, in his flip flops and his socks as he walked out onto the training pitch. Just parked his Lamborghini on the side of the pitch, while all the rest of us. So actually, other people who were on there who you might know were people like Matty Holland, who's now on TalkSport and played for Ipswich in the Republic of Ireland, and chart in different clubs. And we also had Bran Gunn, my old manager from Norwich City, and obviously a Norwich City legend, and just really, really funny guy, and never challenge Bran Gunn to trying to balance a £20 note on your nose, because it's very, very difficult to do. But for someone like Bran Gunn to do, he's been doing it for years, and it's his party piece, so he can do that. And he essentially gets a note and balances it on top of his nose, and then can keep it upright. So that's another little challenge, if you see if you can do that. But he is he's a bit of a master at that. Anyway, so we had all these people on it, like really top players, top people. And Dwight York used to just turn up in his Lamborghini about 2 minutes before we were starting on the pitch session. And Yorkie would walk out just as chilled as you can imagine that he was. He'd just walk out, and he was just the coolest guy I've ever come across. You know, anyone who'd get out of a Ferrari in his flip-flops and socks to walk on the training pitch to do his coaching badges, and was still the best player by a mile. It was, very, very funny. But anyway, the whole point was that the coaching badges that I was doing, it allowed me to come across this model of performance. And that's what the English FA are. Where I got it from was English FA. It's called the four-corner model of performance. And it really says that if you're a player, or if you're an individual who wants to improve their performance, especially in a sporting context, then you can improve in any of these 4 areas. And like, imagine like a little grid of 4 different corners, and that would be the technical aspect of whether your role, your job. Obviously, for me at the time, I was in football, so it was how do you improve the technical aspect of what you do. The bottom left corner was to do with your physical aspect, so clearly that would be, in terms of your size, your speed, your strength, your agility, your power, etc. And that's really, really difficult for someone from Belfast to say, because I would normally say power, P-O-W-E-R, in Belfast is pronounced par, whereas, and some people might say par shar. You've ever heard that phrase before? But if you're in England, and whenever I am in England, I have to say power, because when I say par, nobody ever knows what I'm talking about. So I do have to change my accent every now and again and change different words. Give an example, just as a slight tangent, but my brother used to be a door-to-door salesman, and he was selling N power. But of course, my brother in a Belfast accent, knocking on people's doors in England and saying, "Do you want to buy N power?" And I said, "Excuse me, do you want to buy N power?" What? And eventually, because he got so many doors slammed in his face, he eventually had to say, "Oh, it's N power." So now every time I say power on whether I'm in front of an audience or whether I'm doing these lives or on social media, I have to say power rather than I really want to say par, because it's over here, it's par. There's a par shar. That's what it is. But anyway, some people seem to laugh at that whenever you're saying those kind of things. Anyway, all going back to the physical side of what you do is really, really important in terms of your overall performance. And then, of course, you've got the top right, which for me is the area that I absolutely love. I've always been really fascinated in, and that is the psychology or the mental performance element of what you do. And then the last bottom right was about your social side. So from a kind of playing perspective, it would have been, technical is your passing, shooting, crossing, tackling, etc. Your physical is your, how fast you can run, how much weight you can lift, how high you can jump, etc. The psychology is really, I suppose, everything that's happening in here, everything that's going through your mind and your thinking habits and thought patterns. And then social, especially from a psychology point of view, is more to do with, what are you doing away from when you're training or competing. I suppose that's the easiest way to sort of try and understand what that means. So with all of those things coming into the equation, I just loved the psychology. I just loved the mental performance aspect of it. I thought that that was the best way of me getting more out of myself. And considering I'm a little short arse, only being 5'6", I really needed to try and improve these different areas of my game. So it was definitely something that I thought, if I can improve the mental side of my game, then I'm not really going to improve too much in terms of the technical side. So it is what it is. Physical, I'm 5'6". I'm never going to get to the size of, what was it, like someone like Peter Crouch I played with at both Spurs when he came in as a kid. So whenever we were 16, just joined the youth team at Spurs, Crouchy came in, and I think he was only a 14-year-old, maybe a 13-year-old at the time. So him and Ledley King were in the same year group together, a couple of years plus. I think they were 14s. And amazingly, as our youth team, we had Ledley and Crouchy both came and joined our youth team. And seeing Peter Crouch as a 14-year-old, he was already, I think, about 6'4", 6'5", but literally like that. He was like a little tiny beanpole. And you think that even now he looks thin, but he really isn't, because Crouchy is an incredibly strong guy. You just ask any centre half that ever plays against him, and he looks thin, but actually is so unbelievably strong and big and very, very difficult to tackle him. But as a 14-year-old, he was like that. He was tiny, his legs. I was thinking, my goodness, this guy's going to get his legs broken every time he goes in for a tackle. Turned out I couldn't have been more wrong, because he went on from that to get into the youth team, and then had a couple of years in the youth team while I was fortunate to make my debut at Spurs. But then Crouchy was then starting to do well, scoring goals. And then he went on to have a loan spell at QPR, and then, of course, went on and played for some unbelievable clubs, including obviously Liverpool, and then came back to Spurs a second time, and obviously did really, really well with him and Jermaine Defoe up front, and I think Robbie Keane played with at the time, but in that really good Spurs team, getting to the quarterfinals of Champions League, etc. So it just really talks about the physical element. You are the my size little short arse like me, 4 foot nothing, or you're Crouchy, and there's not really much you can do. So what I kind of came to realize is that I thought the only area that I could really improve on and really give myself some sort of added edge was the psychological element, or the mental side of my performance. And for me to be able to work on that, I needed to educate myself, because I had left school at 16. And whenever I left school, I pretty much had only studied a little bit of sports studies, so I knew a little bit about the body and physiology, knew nothing about psychology, knew nothing about development, knew nothing about how to learn or what's the best ways to do that. And so whenever I came across a book written by a guy called Tony Robbins, this was given to me by a friend of mine at the time. So I was living in London. I was only 17. And when someone who was a friend of mine from Belfast, his brother-in-law, a guy called Tim Ball, who ironically, two of his sons both went on to become professional footballers, one at Norwich City. And again, that's an incredible story, really. And a quick side story, often a little tangent here, but I will come back to the Crouchy and the four-corner model in a minute. That whenever I was 16, I'd just come across from Belfast to London, joined Tottenham Hotspur. Obviously, being Irish and being away from home, it was difficult being away from friends and family. So I wanted a bit of home life and a bit of family life. And my friend, whose sister was living in England, used to invite me up for the weekends. So go and have dinner and just being around family people instead of being isolated and alone in London as a 16-year-old in 1994, which was tough. So whenever I was in their house, they just had their firstborn. So to this guy, Tim Ball, and his wife, Jacqueline, who's my friend's sister, had their first son called Matthew. And I remember holding Matthew as a little six-month-old baby when I just met him. And I remember seeing him going, oh my goodness, that's amazing. He's just brand new born baby. And of course, became friends with Tim and Jackie and used to go up, most weekends over the next 6 years that I was in Tottenham Hotspur. And of course, Matt's now grown to 6. And then he's also got another younger brother called Dominic. So it's Matthew Ball and Dominic Ball. And then they eventually had another son called Philip. And funnily enough, whenever I'd then gone through my career of 6 years at Spurs, 7 or 8 years in Norwich, a couple of years at Luton Town, and when I went back to Norwich the second time, there was a youth team player playing for Norwich City called Matt Ball. And whenever he'd just come out to the end of the youth team and he just got his first year pro contract. And I remember playing for Norwich City in the last year of my career. So I was 32. It was under Paul Lambert. It was the time Norwich City had just gone into League One, first time in 50 years. Norwich City were in the third tier of English football. And I joined them for that last season, my second spell at the club. And I remember going into the changing room at the start of the season, seeing Matt there and thinking, this is amazing. You know, you're playing the same club when I was holding as a little six-month-old baby. Now we're playing at the same club. But of course, I'm a senior player, put it that way. You know, I played about 10 games that season. We'd won the league. We were, you know, had people like Wes Houlihan, you know, Grant Holt, Russell Martin, the current Swansea manager, Chrissy Martin, you know, all these Corey Smith, all these really, really good players, even Fraser Forster, who's obviously gone on and had an amazing career, just had some really, really top players playing in that team, which is why we won the league and beat Leeds to the title after a 30-game unbeaten run that season. And because I played the first few games under Paul Lambert, who was just an amazing guy, I couldn't believe how good Lambert was at motivating people, because he had this ability to be very succinct in what he said and also really limit his words. But with those few words that he did say, he either scared you or motivated you so much to get the most out of you. And clearly there's a kind of lineage within football coaching. And of course, Paul Lambert was a superstar at Celtic over the years. And of course, Paul Lambert was playing in Germany before he joined Celtic and was a Champions League winner in Germany with Borussia Dortmund. Actually, man-marked Zinedine Zidane in the final, and Dortmund beat Real Madrid at the time. So Lambert, Champions League winner, comes back to Celtic, exceptional career at Celtic. And at Celtic, he played under Martin O'Neill. And Martin O'Neill obviously had a really, really good career as a manager. But of course, if you know your footballing history, Martin O'Neill was a two-time European Cup winner, which obviously if you're younger, you know that the European Cup was the predecessor of the Champions League. So Martin O'Neill, when he was playing in Nottingham Forest, won 2 European Cups back-to-back, unheard of, incredible, under Brian Clough. So this lineage of having Brian Clough at the top, the absolute genius of a football man, who then coached Martin O'Neill. Martin O'Neill won 2 times European Cup winner, went on to be a fantastic manager as well. And as he was at Celtic, he was then coaching Paul Lambert, and then Paul Lambert then coached me. So does that give me some link to Brian Clough? I don't know, but it does mean that I could see how they were going through the way they coached and the way they did things. And really, really impressive the way Paul Lambert could motivate his players. And for him to be able to take a team that we were at the bottom of the league when he joined us, he actually spanked us on the start of the season. He was manager of Colchester at the start of the year, beat us 7-1 in that first game, home game of the season. And yeah, that was embarrassing, but we lost 7-1 when he was manager of Colchester. He then left, joined us, and we were bottom of the league, going back to Brian Gunn. Brian Gunn was the manager at the time in Norwich City, who brought me in. Always be very, very grateful to Gunny, because wonderful man, but also give me a second chance back at Norwich City. Gunny got sacked, brought in Paul Lambert, and we went on this 30-game unbeaten run. And Paul Lambert actually played me in those first few games, which was really good, really interesting to play under him. But then, of course, after a few games, he changed the team. Then we're 30 games unbeaten. I never get back into the team. And you're probably thinking, why are you going off on this tangent? But there is always a loop back to where we started, which was my friend's son, Tim Ball's son, called Matthew Ball, who is a 6-month-old kid I was holding in 1994 when I used to go up to his house in Hertfordshire. And I was holding a 6-month-old Matthew Ball, who 16 years later then joined Norwich City as a youth team player. And suddenly Matt Ball, who I'd held as a 6-month-old baby, is now playing with me. He's now in the youth team, just got his first year pro. And then I'm in my second spell at Norwich City in 2010. And in my last ever game for Norwich City, it was actually a reserve game right at the end of the season, because I wasn't playing in the first team, because it had such an amazing team, let's say, with the likes of Holty and Grant Holt and Wes Houlihan, Russell Martin, Fraser Forster, etc. That in my last ever game for Norwich City in the reserve game, I played the first 60 minutes and I came off sub. And who came on for me as a substitute? Matthew Ball. And I just think it's just such an incredible coincidence and circle of life that in 1994, my first weekend in London as a full-time player for Tottenham Hotspur, going up to see my friend's sister and brother-in-law, and for them to let me hold their 6-month-old Matthew ball, and for my last ever game 16 years later to then play for Norwich City with Matthew Ball to come on sub for me in that last ever game just completely blew me away. To have that circle of life, really, what it is. And it's just because I knew I was getting too old and slow to try and compete. And if there's any athletes on there, I just see Chris Akabusi's just joined. So Chris, how you doing, my friend? If anyone doesn't know Chris Akabusi, you've probably been living on the moon. But if you know Chris Akabusi and you know what a fantastic character is, but also what an amazing athlete he was, and you know, competing at that world level for so long as he did, that we all have a shelf life and we all have a kind of a period where it's a bit like kind of throwing a football. It starts at the bottom and then kind of goes up high and then it'll come back down again. It's a bit like a sporting career. You start off at the bottom like I did at Tottenham Hotspur, you know, in the youth team on £25 a week. You know, you're right at the very right bottom of that ladder, the footballing pyramid. And to be able to go from that to, you know, really fortunate a couple of years later to be able to make the debut and play for Tottenham Hotspur in front of, you know, nearly 40,000 people at White Hart Lane and playing up at Anfield and making a debut actually at Villa Park, scoring on my home debut at Spurs for Coventry, to then start at the bottom, get to that level, and then being able to even, you know, go to Norwich City. Obviously needed to go into the Championship for a year or two before we then got promoted back into the Premier League and back up to that pinnacle of professional football. But as these things happen, everything comes back down again. And I remember the moment whenever I realized I needed to stop playing professional football. I was getting too old, too fat, too slow, just wasn't able to compete with these guys. And as I mentioned, I had a second spell at Norwich City. Paul Lambert was the manager. We were having a really good season. We were top of the league. And we had a young player called Corey Smith. Now, Corey Smith is such a great athlete. He was only 18 at the time when he was playing with us. And Corey Smith, who's now gone on, did really well for Bristol City, and he's at Swansea now. And just was an exceptional athlete. And I knew whenever you're playing against him, he was like a right. If anyone plays football, you just know those people who are just, they're on you. They don't give you a second. And even Corey, as an 18-year-old kid, was just like a right. He was on you. And so I remember there was a chance, it was like a 50-50, and I'm gonna lie, I didn't really do a lot of tackling in my career, but I thought it's 50-50. I can't pull out. I'm committed to it. I've got to go for it. And so Corey and I both kind of looked in the whites of each other's eyes, went in, smashed each other, and you could just see both of us hitting each other, kind of falling down on the ground, and the ball's about 2 yards away. And I thought, oh, right, I'm trying to get up. And I saw Corey get up before me. He went and got the ball. And I'm just like scrambling up, trying to get up onto my feet. And then I started chasing Corey, who had the ball at his feet. And he just kept getting further and further and further away from me. And at that moment, I just thought, that's it, Paul. You need to call it a day. You're 32. You cannot compete with these guys anymore. And that was the moment where I thought, that's it. My football career is done. And that was the time whenever I decided, right, very, very fortunate for me, I'm going to be able to stop playing. First of all, choose to stop playing, which is a big, big thing. Because I think a lot of, not just football players, but athletes who don't have that choice, don't have the ability to choose when they're going to retire. So again, one of my really good friends from football is a guy called Dean Ashton, who played with us at Norwich, but he was clearly far too good for Norwich, because when we got relegated out of the Premier League, West Ham bought him for I think 3 million at the time, which was quite a chunk of money. No, sorry, 7 million. We bought him for 3. They bought him for 7 back into the Premier League, and he was just scoring goals every week in the Premier League. An exceptional player, just had everything. Definitely in the sort of top 5 best players I've ever played with, because he could do everything. His goal scoring was exceptional. He could shoot from outside, his head and touch class. And unfortunately for Dean, when he joined up with England, he was at that level where he was playing consistently well in the Premier League that he get called up for England. And on one of the first training sessions, he got injured on the training session. And that injury, I think, was actually with Sean Wright Phillips, ironically. So there's not many people as small as me in football, but Sean Wright Phillips, I remember when we played Man City and walking out and being rowed next to Sean Wright Phillips, and I thought, wow, there is another one or two people who are my size. But for Dean, he clashed with Sean Wright Phillips, had an accident, complete accident, injury, and that injury eventually led to him retiring from football at such an early age, and such a shame for Dean that he wasn't able to go on and have a long-term career. And I think he was only 25 when he retired. And that's a typical example, whether it's him or Darren Eadie, who was another kind of Norwich legend who did really well at Leicester. But these injuries that athletes and players pick up are a lot of the time the reason why they need to stop. And I thought, well, for me at 32, pretty much as blessed and as fortunate as you could ever be to be able to want to do something as a kid. And I don't know if you've had that experience, but definitely growing up in Belfast, we had everything in our lives based around football. So you'd get into school early to go and play football. And then you'd play in the break time, and you'd play in the lunchtime. Then after school, you'd stay behind and play another bit of football. Then you'd go home, throw your bag in the house, and you go out and play some football. And you come in for your dinner, maybe do your homework, and then go back out and play more football. And I did that all the way through all my childhood to be able to get to 16. And then someone said, do you want to play for Tottenham Hotspur? And I was like, yes, please. And like, we'll give you £25 a week. And I don't care. I just want to play professional football. And, very, very fortunate that on the first day that I signed at Tottenham Hotspur, Jurgen Klinsmann signed, World Cup winner, a German international, just starred in the 1994 World Cup. And to play with these guys and Teddy Sheringham and Nicky Barmby and Darren Andert and all these amazing, Sol Campbell, all these amazing players that I was fortunate to be around. And then eventually even more fortunate after 2 years in the youth team that Alan Sugar, who was the chairman at the time, then gives you a contract and said, do you want us to pay you a bit more money to play football? I'm like, that's amazing. It's like, it's £11,000 a year. It's £200 a week. And I'm like, I don't care. I don't care if I'm the lowest paid player at the club. I just want to play football. And then, of course, there's an opportunity because a few injuries happened in the squad at the time. And you manage to make your Premier League debut up front with Teddy Sheringham, who's just such an amazing player, best player I ever played with. And you're playing up front with this just exceptional player, exceptional guy, amazing guy. And at the end of that season, Jerry Francis turned around, who's the manager who gave me my debut, and said, do you want a 3-year contract? Do you want some more money? And I'm like, this is amazing. So the whole way through it, until eventually people just kept going, do you want us to give you some more money to play football? I'm like, I would have done this for free, but if you want to give me money for doing it, I'm your man. Brilliant. All the way through to 32 to be able to then stop that and say, do you know what? I've everything that I could ever have possibly wanted to do in football, and the experiences from making your debut to scoring a goal in front of 25,000, 40,000, 75,000 when I was fortunate to play at Old Trafford and score, or playing for your country, or winning league titles, or winning a trophy at Wembley with Luton Town, and walking up the steps and lifting a trophy in front of, all those fans. Just everything you could have possibly wanted to do, to be able to do all of that and also have the ability to say, thank you so much for what you've given me and what I've taken from football, and now I'm going to go down a different route. And that was why I started going down the psychology route. And I think that's about all I should kind of cover today, because I've been talking for 30 minutes. Apologies for all questions that have come in, because I haven't actually looked at any of them. But this comes all the way back to whenever I started doing my coaching badges with Dwight York, as he got out of the Lamborghini in his flip-flops and was just the best player on the pitch. And it was to do with this mental side of performance, which I absolutely loved and have always loved. And from when I stopped playing in 2010 for the last 11 years, I've been working in this area. So I do need to shoot. Thank you for getting in touch, everybody. Apologies I haven't name checked anyone, or apologies for having read out your questions. Sometimes stories get added on to other stories that add on to other stories that add on to the Crouchy story that add on to the Chris Akabusi thing that add on to something else. And yeah, it's been really interesting just having a little chat with you, and I hope you've enjoyed it, and I will catch you next week at the same time. So thank you very much for joining, everyone. Have a great weekend, and I hopefully will see you